Good morning, students. Today we are going to discuss the first stanza of the poem Ode to the West Wind, whose introduction I had given you in the last lecture. So, in the poem Ode to the West Wind, as I previously told you also, that the first three stanzas are dedicated to the natural imagery, that is, the poet has described the natural phenomenon of the west wind and how it affects the nature all around him in different shapes and ways. So, in the first section of the poem, the poet addresses the west wind directly and he personifies it by calling it the breath of the autumn's being. That is, to him, the west wind is the breath of the autumn, as in he tends to blow during the autumn season and tends to bring about all the natural activity during that season. In the first section of the poem, two comparisons are notable. First, the west wind to the poet appears to be the breath of the autumn's being. Now, autumn is the season in the northern hemisphere that almost marks the culmination of the year. That means it comes slightly before the winter season, which is considered to be the final season of the year in the northern hemisphere. Now, to the poet, firstly, the west wind appears to be the breath of the autumn's being. That means it tends to blow in the autumn season upon the dead and decaying pestilence stricken multitudes. That means he's referring to the leaves that are falling from the trees or branches of trees during the autumn season. So, on one hand, the poet feels that the west wind aids at burying the dead and decaying leaves into the ground. That means, firstly, it compares the west wind to an enchanter or a magician who aids in burying those dead and decaying pestilence stricken leaves into the ground, just as ghosts and spirits tend to flee from an enchanter or a magician. So, I want you to notice the beautiful imagery to the west wind. When it blows in the autumn season, it appears to the poet as if it is an enchanter or a magician from whom the dead and decaying pestilence stricken autumnal leaves tend to fly away in fear and bury themselves in the ground as a dead person lies in its corpse. So, this is the destroying aspect of the west wind that the poet discusses. So, on one hand, where the poet looks at the west wind as a destroyer, that means it carries the autumnal leaves by burying them underground. At the same time, it also tends to act as a preserver, according to the poet. That means it also helps in gently carrying the unsprouted seeds into the ground, where, according to the poet, they lie buried till the season of winter, after which the summer season arrives and blows its clarion call. Now, clarion is a horned instrument which is used to produce music. So, to the poet, the east wind, that is the spring season, has been personified as the azure sister of the west wind. Now, azure means blue. Now, you would ask that why is the color blue associated with the east wind, whereas the color pale black, pestilence stricken and hectic reds were associated with the west wind? It is that the color blue is usually associated with purity, something celestial or God related. So, to the poet, the east wind, or that the spring season, seems to be comparatively calmer and lower in intensity as compared to the west wind, which causes the autumnal leaves to appear as though they are dead and decaying and pestilence stricken. So he says that west wind also, alongside acting as a destroyer of the autumnal leaves, appears to be a preserver of the unsprouted seeds, as it tends to bury them underground till the winter season, after which the azure sister of the west wind, that is the spring season, arrives and helps them in flowering of those seeds and helps them in becoming a plant, so that they can fill the valley with multitudes of colors and other sort of vegetation. So in this stanza, the west wind serves a dual purpose, in that it appears to the poet that it all acts as a destroyer of the autumnal leaves and as the preserver of the unsprouted seeds, which it helps by burying them in the ground, and helps them in sprouting all over again by doing this. So in this section, the west wind has been called as a preserver as well as the destroyer. Now this sentiment of the poet can also be compared to the Hindu mythological notion of Lord Shiva, who is also considered to be the creator and the destroyer of mankind in that sense. So on one hand, the poet feels that the west wind in the autumn season aids in burying those dead and decaying leaves into the ground, and on the second hand, it appears to him as a preserver, as it also aids at burying the unsprouted leaves, that means the leaves that have not become a plant yet. It also helps those leaves by helping them or carrying them in a most gentle manner and helping them in burying them into the ground, so that they can sprout again in the spring season, whom Shelley beautifully calls as the azure sister of the west wind. So to Shelley, the spring wind that helps in regeneration and revitalizing of the seeds which are yet to become plants, to him the spring wind is treated as the azure sister of the west wind, who tends to blow its clarion. That is, clarion is a horned instrument that is used to play music. So according to Shelley, he says that when the east wind, who he terms as the azure sister of the west wind. Now azure, why is it called azure? Azure means blue, and blue is always a color that is associated with something that's pure and connected with God and the Almighty. So to him, the east wind comparatively appears to be a rather calm and peaceful wind, who aids in bringing about new life and revitalizing the earth. So he says that where on one hand the west wind helps and acts as a destroyer by burying the dead and decaying autumnal leaves, which to him appear to be black, pale, yellow, pestilence stricken, and hectic red. Please notice the beautiful, colorful imagery that the poet has given here. So, on one hand, to the poet, it seems as though it appears to the poet as though the west wind acts as a destroyer. That means it aids in burying those dead and decaying leaves into the ground, and at the same time he tends to be a preserver by carrying gently those seeds which are yet to be grown into plants and help them in burying them underground alongside those autumnal leaves. But the second stanza describes the activities of the west wind in the air. That means the poet goes on to describe in a breathtaking manner how the west wind aids in bringing about a forceful and powerful storm by creation of thunder clouds. So firstly, the poet says that to him it seems as though the clouds that are roaming in the sky appear to be falling on the surface of the west wind. So now I want you to imagine that a strong and powerful wind, that is the west wind, is blowing, and upon that blowing, the clouds from the sky are falling upon its surface as though leaves tend to fall from branches of trees. So the poet says that to him it appears as though that the west wind causes the clouds to fall upon its surface, and therefore it also aids in bringing about a gigantic and powerful storm. So in the second section, poet tends to give us a very scary imagery of the effect of the west wind upon the thunder clouds, or especially the activities it causes to occur in the air. That means to the poet it appears as though those thunder clouds that are grey and black in color appear to be that of the hair of the Maenads. That means to the poet the thunder clouds in the air appear as though they are the hair on the head of a Maenad that are tend to open up. That means imagine there's a Maenad who's frenzied and dancing in an ecstatic manner. So in that sense, it appears to the poet or the onlooker or the audiences as though that those thunder clouds are the hairs on the head of a Maenad, which are spread out about in the sky in a vertical form. That means imagine the hair of a Maenad going up in the air, and that's how the poet sees the activities of the west wind in the clouds, and says that to him it appears as though that those thunderstorm clouds that are caused by the west wind, that are brought about by the west wind or created by the west wind, are the hair of the frenzied Maenads, and they tend to spread out in the sky in the same manner as though the hair of Maenads are spread out around them when they dance about in a frenzied manner. So in this way, this comparison appears to be quite scary and nerve-wracking, but at the same time it's quite beautiful and complex. So this is a very complex imagery in which the hair of the Maenads is compared with the thunder clouds which are spread upon the surface of the west wind. So what west wind does to the thunder clouds by spreading it upon the surface of the air, same is done by Maenads when they open up their hair and tend to when they open up their hair and tend to dance in a frenzied manner, intoxicated by wine. To conclude today's lecture, I would like to say that in today's lecture we discussed the first two sections of the Ode to the West Wind. In the first section, the activities of the west wind during the seasons of autumn and spring were discussed, and specifically speaking, the activities of the west wind on the earth were discussed, and in the second section, the activities of the west wind in the clouds were discussed. In both these sections, the west wind appears to be as both the preserver as well as the destroyer. So you can make out from the tone of the section itself that the poet on one hand presents to us a very hopeless picture of humanity by way of personifying it through the west wind, and at the same time it is also a hopeful instrument of bringing about a new age of humanity. With that being said, I would like to conclude today's lecture, and I'll meet you next time with the third part of this series. Thank you.